from media, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the press conference for Ashley Judd. It's with a great pleasure I welcome Ms. Ashley Judd, Goodwill Ambassador of UNFPA, visiting Sri Lanka. While she is best known as an famous actress with a career extending over 2 decades, she is also an acclaimed humanitarian and also a passionate advocate for social justice. In particular, she is very much interested in the sexual reproductive health and reproductive rights of women and girls, as well as ending gender-based violence. And she's been working on these issues for many years. So Ashley was appointed as a UNFPA Goodwill Ambassador in 2016, and she has traveled to Jordan, Turkey, Ukraine, and India. And I believe in this, her visit in Sri Lanka added another aspect to her perspective, because Sri Lanka is in its way to high middle income country after the 30 years of war, civil conflict, with an amazing track record of socio-economic development. But of course, there are remaining issues in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to ensure that no one is left behind. And we all are aware that there are challenges faced by Sri Lanka. For example, in terms of disparity, even maternal health, maternal mortality, the national average is 34 per 100,000 live births, but in some areas, like Trincomalee, the figure is 64. So there are people who are still struggling and seeking good services. So this is why UNFPA's work is very much needed and relevant in the Sri Lankan context. And we have been receiving overwhelming support from the government and other partners for our work on sexuality education, on gender-based violence prevention and response, as well as youth in peace building. So these are the issues that we have been working for almost 50 years now, and we continue to work on these issues. So Ashley has been such an inspiration to the world, and now we can say that she also has seen Sri Lanka. She has visited various places over the past few days, such as the university in Kandy, where she had interacted with the students on the issue of gender-based violence. This morning, she has visited the Soisa Hospital to see the situation of health services in Colombo. And she visited also the garment factory yesterday to witness how women can be empowered and can work and economically independent in this country. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ms. Ashley Judd.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. There you go. Now, where I'm from in the southern part of the United States, it would be typical to say good afternoon back to me, so we can say take two. Just like in the movies, we get a second take. Good afternoon. Now that's a very Sri Lankan welcome, and I've enjoyed your hospitality so far. I thank you very much for all of the kindness that's been shown to me. Oh my goodness. Now I'm going to feel shy. It's as if I have something to say. Thank you all so much for choosing to spend some time with us this afternoon. I know that there is a lot going on in Sri Lanka at the moment. You've got some upcoming elections and always interesting things to cover. So UNFPA and I are very grateful that you would choose to spend some time with us to talk about our work here in Sri Lanka. I have been hosted so graciously by UNFPA, and I want to give a very special thanks to the country staff for inviting me in the first place, and for organizing such a dynamic and interesting and really sweet visit. And I think sweet is a word that comes to mind when I think about Sri Lanka. As Ritsu mentioned, I've had the opportunity to travel so far in my capacity as Goodwill Ambassador for UNFPA to Jordan, a country, of course, that has an enormous influx of refugees from nearby Syria. I visited with refugees both in host communities and in the two camps, Zatari and Azraq. And it's a very different kind of work that in a way, UNFPA is doing there. It's still about making sure that every pregnancy is intended and wanted, that every childbirth is safe, and that all youth have the opportunity to fulfill their potential, and that everyone should live free from violence. But the context is very different in Jordan, as it is in eastern Ukraine, a place where there's an active and ongoing conflict. And of course, you are a post-conflict society emerging after 28 years of really brutal and savage civil war, the likes of which I can't even imagine, and my condolences continue to go out to those of you who have and continue to suffer. I've also been to Turkey and India. And what's so different about Sri Lanka is that you represent what can happen when a country is able to empower its people through universal access to education, universal health care, to reduce maternal mortality, and to have capacity building and partnership with the government in such a way that strengthens your local institutions. So many of the places I visited so far, UNFPA is engaged in service delivery. But here your service delivery is so outstanding that we're more consulting on the government level about identifying those subnational gaps, as Ritsu mentioned, in maternal mortality, and understanding that we can be allies and advisors in improving your status from a lower middle income country to a high income country. Now, all of that being said, there are ongoing challenges. I mean, and I want to make sure that I mention I'm an American, and I don't swoop in here as if my country is good, right, and perfect, because obviously there is tremendous ongoing gender violence, intimate partner violence, sexual harassment, and discrimination in the United States, something that I mention often as an egregious example of ongoing gender violence in the United States is that rapists have paternity rights in 22 states in the US. So I always try to make sure that we understand we're speaking from a very level playing field here, and that I come to you as a global citizen and not a high and mighty American. So some of the things that have definitely stood out to me where I hope UNFPA can continue to be helpful to Sri Lanka, and where I hopefully can help do some good as well. Some of the harassment that I've been startled to learn about includes in your public transport, that 90% of females who use public transportation experience gender-based harassment, which is really just deeply unfortunate, and that you have very low female participation in the labor force. Although 60% of your university students are female, your labor force is only 36% female. And of course, that doesn't include the informal sector, but women in the informal sector have a lot of vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. Also, 50% of young people don't have a basic understanding of how the opposite sex's reproductive system works. And so that really speaks to my passion for sexual and reproductive health and comprehensive age and culturally appropriate sex education. So those are just some of my observations so far. What I'd really love to do is open it up for questions and get to know you a little bit better, and hopefully by doing that you can also get to know me a little bit better. We can talk about the work that we've done so far since I arrived in Sri Lanka, for example, over at university, engaging in Kandy, engaging with students using art and theater. We can talk about my visit today to the maternity hospital, visiting a gender-based violence counselor who works with women and with couples who have violence in their relationships. And that's just for starters. So who would like to be brave and ask the first question?
So please identify yourself when you ask questions, and name and organization, please. And also, please focus on her capacity as a goodwill ambassador. Question related to that. Thank you.
Hi,
Please.
what's your name?
Hi, I'm Jordana with Daily News.
Hi, Jordana. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming today.
Of course, thanks for being here. So, as one of the founders of the Me Too movement, and thank you for that,
You're welcome.
I'm wondering if you, after your time in Sri Lanka, have any idea of what some non-policy ways that gender-based violence can be tackled here in non-policy ways. So, in the U.S., for example, and across the world, and in Sri Lanka, it's been tackled through social media,
Yes.
through people like just speaking their minds. But I wonder if you've seen that in your trip here. I know you went to a play, I think, about
Yes,
gender-based violence. So
I did.
If you want to just speak about non-policy ways.
Sure. So it's a wonderful question about non-policy based solutions to gender-based violence. And I will give some examples from the pretty remarkable art experience that I had at the university over in Kandy, which is a lovely place, and the botanical gardens are completely divine. I could live in the orchid house in particular. So the students were invited to represent what violence looks and feels like in 5 sectors: on social media, at home, at university, and in the workplace. And that's only 4. I said there were 5. Maybe the other one will come to me.
Transport?
Oh, in transport, yes, of course, which we've already mentioned, and in public transport. And in particular on social media, they used the Me Too hashtag, talking about the hypersexualization of girls and women. And I say girls and women because they included children in what they represented. And how the internet needs to be a free and safe place where everyone can participate, free from bullying and from misogyny. And some of their solutions to that were really just talking about it and being able to stand up to other people and continuing to demand our place in social media. So it's not just block the trolls or get off WhatsApp. It's the bullies and boys and men who engage in that behavior who need to change. It's not reducing our participation that is the solution. And the depiction of intimate partner violence and family violence at home was so powerful. The kids drew a guy whose mouth was open, and what was coming out of his mouth was a fist. And he was showing how he expresses violence with his words. And his hand had a wedding ring on it to show that he was a spouse, and the other hand had a bouquet of flowers with a card that said, to my dear wife. So it's the, I love you, I hate you, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again, and oh my gosh, doing it again. And I'm giving some pretty dramatic and vivid examples, but the point is that the kids were talking about it in a non-shaming way that was very safe and really open. And it's that kind of awareness that creates advocacy and courage. Courage really being the operative word. And then the play, which is what I really want to emphasize, was absolutely phenomenal. It's one of, I love doing art and theater with people all over the world. It's been a part of my humanitarian work since I started in this in 2004, I think it was. But the play that they did was really long. It was almost 40 minutes long, and it had about 12 characters in it. And they showed a couple of university girls who are taking public transport home, and they get catcalled and heckled. Then they go to a kiosk to top up their mobile phones, and this guy who had done the catcalling was all hip, slick, and cool and managed to finagle the phone number of the girl whom he had catcalled from the kiosk. And from then he goes on to start calling her and harassing her and saying, oh, you're so cute and I want to get together with you. And then it leads eventually to him taking pictures and saying, threatening to post them on social media. So she feels like she has to comply with his demands because of sexual bribery. And then it culminates in a rape. So the play showed a full spectrum of gender-based violence and discrimination that is very typical for Sri Lankan girls and women. Not all girls and women experience all of that, but all Sri Lankan girls and women experience some of that, which is also the American experience that I think Me Too has demonstrated so amply. So this is really where the non-policy-based solution comes in, because the kids went back to the very beginning of the play and they redid it with the audience with claps, stopping the play at pivotal moments to show how girls and women can empower their own behavior to create different outcomes. So they had so many ideas, so many more ideas than even I had, and some of them were commercial and entrepreneur based, like those kiosk folks should have a different system so that phone numbers can't be copied, to boys standing up to other boys and saying, no, I'm not going to give you that girl's phone number, you don't know her, that's not right and that's not appropriate, to when the girl is being called, her having voice and courage and it being okay for women and girls to become angry and say, stop it, don't call me, this is inappropriate and unwelcome, and hanging up as many times as it takes. Of course, blocking a number is, being able to block a number is always helpful. And all those communication and behavior changes that can disrupt cycles of microaggression and outright violence. So the play was something very special, and the kids paid such close attention, were incredibly inventive with their responses, and I was really impressed.
Anyone else?
I'm Lourdes from LMD. Thank you for taking my question. Sorry. Hi, I'm Lourdes from LMD. Thank you for taking my question.
Thanks for coming.
So India is a country which has a quite high mortality rate
Yes.
of children, especially young girls. And there's also quite a lot of unwanted young girls there. Now, in a country of over 1 billion people, how would you go about changing the cultural and sometimes even extreme religious beliefs which have them believing that girls are abominations or curses on their families?
Right. Well, I understand here in Sri Lanka, the birth of a girl is considered lucky. I was delighted to hear that. And, you know, your sex ratio is 52% female, 48% male. And, you know, frankly, I was concerned when I learned that it had to do with female infanticide. And I was, you know, delighted to learn that that's not the case here in Sri Lanka. And is that my mother calling to tell me that she's proud of me? That it has more to do with the aging population than with son preference. And, you know, UNFPA wants to empower girls and boys and prevent norms around harmful practices. So ending child early and forced marriage, ending female genital mutilation and cutting, and making sure that girls have equal access to sanitation and hygiene, which is, you know, seemingly not so much an issue here in Sri Lanka, which is absolutely wonderful. Making sure that every woman can have her dignity regarding her menses, and that girls go to school. You know, when an educated girl is a more valued girl, and when a girl is educated, she becomes a more powerful economic actor. And that economic acting has positive impacts on families. At first, it can require a social negotiation because a woman with money can be startling in a household, as we learned through our garment factory visit yesterday at MAS. So that is in part my answer, that I think that as broad and troubling as the facts are that you present in your question, there are an equal number of opportunities for change and progress. Thank you.
I'm a blogger and a columnist. Nalaka is my name. I have a question about the kind of meetings you had in Sri Lanka. I'm curious to know if you had a chance to meet any of the sexual minorities in Sri Lanka, the LGBT community, right. Which is discriminated against institutionally and legally in this country. And what are your views on ensuring equality for them, because that should be part of the larger sexual and reproductive rights goals that we should pursue?
Yes. Thank you so much for the question. It's really important that you brought up our friends and family in the LGBTQI community. And so far my work in Sri Lanka has not introduced me to any sexual minorities, as you said, but I am aware that there are organizations here in country that do specifically work with particularly vulnerable groups. I'm going to meet with the folks from Women in Need and also ACT Form I read about. So I'm here specifically in my capacity as UNFPA Goodwill Ambassador, and again, our mandate is to protect and empower the sexual and reproductive health of all folks everywhere, and that definitely includes sexual minorities. And were my trip longer, I would definitely try to hang out with some of those folks because they have so much to teach me about dignity, about resilience, about determination, and the depth of the human experience, and how much we can suffer when we're discriminated against. You know, we're all just folks, we're all just people, and it's important to include our brothers and sisters in our progress. Thanks so much for the question. And our policies have to be intersectional, you know, and that's part of the invitation that Sri Lanka has as a lower middle income country, is making sure that no one is left behind, because you've already brought so many of your folks with you through universal access to education, universal access to healthcare. So, you know, let's gather up those who are still left behind and make sure that we bring them into the prosperity and progress that Sri Lanka promises. Hi.
I'm Tarini. I'm from the Sunday Times paper. My main question is, in a country where the LGBTQ community does have little to no rights, there's lack of sanitation, there's lack of contraceptives available freely, what is your overall message, mainly to women who are more silent, especially in patriarchal communities where they're unable to come up, maybe because of income discrepancies or whatever? I mean, how do you get them to speak? And how can this Me Too movement even resonate well throughout our kind of community, where we have a lot more hushed up victims than survivors per se?
It's such a good question, talking about family planning access and prevalence. So your family planning prevalence is quite high in Sri Lanka, with, of course, the gaps in the subnational and minority population differences to which were referred in the opening statement. And so what UNFPA advocates is voluntary, human rights-based, individual empowerment regarding one's reproductive health, the opportunity and the dignity of deciding if and when and whether and how many children to have. And that requires making all different kinds of modern family planning methods available. Today I was at the maternity health clinic, and women had a variety of methods that they were using, whether it was long-lasting reversibles like IUDs, there were patches, there are folks who prefer the pill. I understand that condom use is quite low and confined to specific kinds of relationships, but correct and consistent condom use is very important, particularly in preventing STDs and HIV. And, you know, we just have to keep making family planning available and do the advocacy and the awareness that it's a rights-based fact of life, and that it's for individuals to have that autonomy and agency and dignity of choice. And I hope that answers your question. And about voice, you know, that's why I'm very excited to be visiting the Women in Need shelter, and why, when I was visiting today the gender-based violence counseling office at the maternity hospital, because those of us who have experienced violence, and I certainly have, I was molested for the first time when I was 7 years old, and I've experienced 3 rapes, and of course I'm a survivor of sexual harassment, which I've been talking about a lot lately in the United States. We need safe spaces where we can talk to one another, to find our voices and continue to have the courage and the resilience to speak our truth with dignity and respect.
Just to follow up to that.
Yes, of course.
especially in low-income groups, especially in the north and the south.
Yes.
I mean, that's where, if you read about the data, there is a lot more live births in these kind of places, especially maternal deaths. So, I mean, how do you make low-income contraceptives available to these kind of places is kind of the question, you know, because contraceptives, I mean, if the middle income earners themselves aren't using it,
Right.
I mean, what about the low-income? Because lack of education, maybe they don't know as well how to use it, or, I mean, how do we create these kinds of awareness campaigns?
Well, I can answer some, and I'll also ask Ritsu if she would have something additional to offer. Part of the great news about Sri Lanka is 99.9% of all births have a skilled attendant present. And when you've got that kind of skilled maternity care delivery, that's a wonderful opportunity to talk about family planning methods, you know, before delivery and after delivery, and postpartum IUD insertion, patches, going away with the pill and condoms. That's really the low-hanging fruit for family planning delivery to poor folks who want it for themselves. And Ritsu, do you have something further to add?
Yes. So in Sri Lanka, of course, the universal access to family planning services is there. So I guess what you're referring to is probably the implementation of that policies. And I also understand that in some cases, in some families, it's not open topic, so that the women may feel a little bit hesitant to tell her husband, for example, I'm going to this clinic to get family planning services. So that might be preventing some families to have access, but this is why NFPA really advocate for the use of family planning, voluntary family planning services, and increase the quality of services. So that's part of our mission.
And it's so important that we women talk to one another, because that's where we get so much of our information. You know, we girls have to group up and talk about our sexual and reproductive health. And mothers-in-law have a lot of power. Sisters-in-law have a lot of power. And, I mean, I've seen some pretty remarkable gatekeeper projects, for example, in India with UNFPA and another organization with whom I work, PSI, where when we educate and sensitize a mother-in-law, you can really unlock access to scores, dozens of other girls and women. And of course, Sri Lanka is a signatory to Family Planning 2020, so the implementation is everything.
Hi, my name is Shehan. I'm from News First. I don't know so much about what your experience is when it comes to women representation in government. And as you said, the election is just a few days away from now. But were you able to meet anyone in government, women who are involved in local government
Yes.
in this type of position? And what was it like? And also, what do you think the importance of women as decision makers in this country is concerned?
Yes. So it's a really good question about, in a general way, female participation in the political space here in Sri Lanka. And as was noted, your population is 52% female. However, your political participation at the federal or the national level of women is only 5.3%, which is really, really low. It's even lower than the United States Congress, which is really saying something, folks. And then at the local level, your female participation is only 1.9%. And thank God for this new quota of 25% women in elected positions, because it's, you know, it's going to be a boon, to use a wonderful spiritual term. You know, women in the political space is always a good thing for elevating the voices and the status of girls and women. So I'm excited for you in your upcoming elections. It will be interesting to see what comes of them. Obviously, harassment of female candidates is a terrible problem. There was a prevalence survey that was done that talked about everything from slander to defamation to sexual coercion and bribery to physical attacks and rape. And, you know, this fear of girls and women assuming our rightful place as peers is really something I think boys and men are just going to have to live through, and just give us a chance and you'll see that it's good for everybody. And then with regard to meeting with officials, I had a wonderful breakfast yesterday with members of the diplomatic community, and UNFPA is especially grateful to the Government of Canada for its support of UNFPA here and what we're able to do for Sri Lankans. We're also, with Canada, going to be doing a gender-based violence prevalence study because data matters. And when we've got that data, then policies and advocacy and implementation can be data-driven. We had a really good conversation with representative from the High Commission from Australia, and there were lots of other folks there who were big supporters of both the Sri Lankan community and UNFPA's work here. Hi.
Newspaper. So what do you think is solution to sexism, like gender-based problems that use religion as a cover?
Yeah.
Like child marriages and genital mutilation.
So the question is about using religion as a cover for sexism. Boy, I wish I had a silver bullet answer to that one. Well, I can, taking off my UNFPA hat and speaking just as Ashley, I am a faith-based person. I was raised Christian. I like to say I was baptized a couple times to make sure it worked. And I have a very ecumenical faith. Today we were in a beautiful Buddhist temple. I'm really excited to visit the Hindu temple. I've been to the Temple of the Tooth, which was a really special experience, and we made sure to go during the monks' procession because I wanted to get some of that good stuff on me. And what I was taught and what I believe is that we're all created equal in the image and likeness of a loving creator. And so my faith teaches me that that is exactly where gender equality begins, and how we can have, and how we, I don't really know what to say beyond that. I mean, I understand that there are pockets of, and it's very difficult and sensitive to single out a specific community. And so I'm careful to add, that even within Christianity in the United States, there can be a lot of asymmetry of power between men and women. But some of the divorce laws amongst specific religious communities in Sri Lanka are very problematic and very unequal. And it's not good for families, and it's not good for children. So I think that, to me, spirituality and faith are about equity and dignity and balance. Thank you for the question.
Hi, my name is Himal.
Hi.
Some gender-based activists, myself included, in Sri Lanka and I'm sure elsewhere in the world as well, struggle with countering this criticism that the Me Too movement trivializes quote-unquote real problems faced by women by needlessly emphasizing and highlighting what these critics perceive to be trivial problems. Any advice on that?
So the question was from a gender-based activist. Thank you.
I would call myself an activist, but I do consider myself a
feminist.
feminist.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. Boys and men are integral to the movement, and you are our allies, and we have to do this together. It's not an asymmetrical movement. It has to be interdependent and inclusive. And I think my answer is a personal one, in that everyone is different, and everyone experiences microaggression and oppression and violence according to their particular set point. And it's important that we value everyone's individual experiences, and we don't have a, what am I trying to say? It's not a contest. It's not a competition of who is more hard done by. And what we're looking for is a world where gentleness and tenderness and kindness are as valued as the norms of toxic masculinity that are so celebrated right now. And is it actually okay to use those words? Oh my gosh, and in public at a press conference, that we're looking for a world that has tenderness in it? I don't know if I'm answering your question particularly well, but I can say for myself that, and what I know about the brain, we all experience trauma in the brain stem, and that experience is the same for everybody. And that's what we're trying to cope with, is that ancient adrenaline, cortisol, stress response. And we can't trivialize other people's experiences. We need to listen to them with dignity and respect. And yes, there is a spectrum of behavior, and there is a gradient, and we need the vocabulary to be able to describe what is a microaggression, what is harassment, what is assault, and what is more severe violence. And that's part of the movement and part of the growth. And I know that the International Labor Organization, the ILO, is creating sexual harassment standards, and they will be establishing this international floor onto which we can all be signatories so that we understand what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And I think that will help normalize our vocabulary very significantly. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Dara. I'm an independent blogger. In a country where sex and sexuality is considered a taboo subject to talk about, especially amongst parents and children,
yes,
what do you think that we can do, like my generation, could do to change that mindset? Because I know a lot of people who want to discuss contraceptive methods with their parents, but because of culture and like religion, they're just too scared to kind of bring it out. So what do you think that we can do to change that mindset that sex is bad or sexuality is, you have to be you just have to be straight? Like, what do you think we can do to change that mindset?
So UNFPA really advocates comprehensive reproductive and sexual health education. And one of the ways that we do that is an online tool called Road to Adulthood. And so anybody can go onto the website and learn about his or her reproductive health. And I think that once an individual is empowered with medically accurate sex education and a fundamental understanding of the way our bodies work, and God designed us and our bodies work the way they work because that's the way God made us, and there's everything in the world right with that, nothing in the world wrong with it, then we can have that conversation with our friends, and we can spread correct information as opposed to living in the old culture of silence and shadows and shame. It's just important to have frank and open, medically accurate based conversations about sex education. And having a curriculum that's online can hopefully then reach into dynamic personal teaching in the classroom. And all of it, of course, needs to be done within a sensitive and local context. Yes.
Hi, I'm Sinduri.
Hi.
Thank you for being in Sri Lanka, and I'm not very sure how long you're going to be here. But do you intend to visit the north by any chance? Because there are a lot of war widows who is undergoing
Yes.
sexual harassment.
Yes.
So do you intend visiting the north?
I understand that a quarter of households in Sri Lanka are female-headed, and a lot of those are because of the war. And unfortunately, I'm not going to the north. There wasn't time for me to do so, but I really, it's important to me to be with the most vulnerable, and post-traumatic stress disorder is, I think, something that's intergenerational and can become imprinted upon a culture. And I wish I had time to go, and if UNFPA would be so kind as to have me back, maybe on another visit I could. And I can't really fathom what y'all have been through. My country had a civil war in the 1860s, and I am from what used to be a slave state. And I know, the controversy and the ongoing sort of footprint of that all these years later, and it's still so fresh for you, and you really have my empathy and compassion. Is there anything else before we close? Have we left any stone unturned? Well, I could tell you just a little bit about my visit to the garment factory yesterday. The garment factory is of MAS Holdings, and in particular, what MAS asked UNFPA to do was identify on the corporate level any gaps in gender sensitivity and gender advocacy. And the garment factory in and of itself is doing a really good job of providing gainful employment and access to, there was a little saying I'll just share with you that I picked up from them. They create pathways so that women can qualify themselves. And they do everything from allow girls and women to go back to school and complete secondary education if they hadn't, to have flexible work hours if they're an athlete and need to do their fitness training. They help folks get their driving licenses. I mean, it's a crazy good place. But what can happen when a woman is financially empowered and is finding her voice is when she goes home, that can be a little disruptive to the previous way that things worked in the spousal relationship. And so UNFPA was helping directly with the factory workers and the staff there respond to gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and interpersonal negotiation to create greater safety. So that was a really neat thing that I saw.
If I may ask another question.
Sure.
It's about the Me Too movement, and Time magazine is profiling you and others called you a silent breaker. But in our part of the world, it's taken a lot more courage and time for women who face harassment for years or decades to speak out. For example, in India's Bollywood and in our own film industry, these are happening, these acts of harassment are happening all the time, and yet there has been very little public open discussion about it very recently. So what's your words of advice or encouragement to others in film and television communities around the world, women in these communities? How can they be silent breakers?
Well, your question is the perfect question to end our time together, because from here I'm going to meet with members of the Sri Lankan film community to talk about exactly that. And my advice is it's professional, it's political, and it's personal, and it's just my advice. And that is, do the right thing. And for me, it was clearly the right thing to speak up. Now, I can't guarantee that the response will be the watershed reckoning that's happened in the United States around sexual harassment. But I know that it's the right thing to speak up. And, you know, it's totally valid and appropriate to fear retaliation, so it's important to take measures to stay safe. But breaking the silence is the first step towards the enormous change and societal shift that can and must happen. Thank you all so much for your time today. It was really kind of you to come out. We appreciate it a lot.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for this time. Thank you.
Thank you.